All right. Okay, well, for those of us that have just joined, my name is Stephanie Robertson, and I'm the chair of the Social Value Canada Board. Today is the 8th of July, 2021, and we are at the Canadian Social Value Exchange. The Canadian Social Value Exchange is one of a series of conversations around social value and emerging thoughts and skills and tools. So if there's something that happens today that you enjoy, which we hope that there will be, we're hoping that you will join us again in the future. I will say that the best part of my role as the board chair is that I get to pull together interesting people, and the conversation that we're going to have today is very near and dear to my heart. I'd like to introduce our speakers, Claire Dove, who's joined us from the UK, Victor Beausoleil, who is joining us from Ghana, but is typically based in Toronto, and Tabatha Bull. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they're going to do a much better job than I will. So Claire, maybe we could go to you first and then to Victor and to Tabatha, and we'll reverse the order back and forth as we chat over the next hour or so.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. My name's Claire Dove, and I am currently the Crown representative for the voluntary charity and social enterprise sector in central government in the UK government. Before this, before I retired last year in the middle of a pandemic. So for almost 40 years, I was the chief exec of an organisation called Blackburn House. And it was what we did was to empower women through training them in non-traditional areas of work, so IT, construction, etc. And we ran 6 social enterprises that supported the work that we did. So now I'm devoting my time to trying to change things up a little in the UK government, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit later. Thank you, Stephanie.
Victor, would you mind introducing yourself?
My name is Victor Beausoleil. I give thanks to my ancestors and absolutely. My name is Victor Beausoleil. I'm a husband and father of 4. I give thanks to my ancestors and the stewards of all the lands that we're on currently. I'm currently the executive director of SETSI, which stands for Social Economy Through Social Inclusion. And we work within all things that we consider social innovation, which is social finance, social economy, social procurement, social acquisitions, community economic development, impact investing, and the cooperative economic space within Canada.
Wow.
Ani, Tabatha Indigenous, Nipsing Indigenous, Hello all, my name is Tabatha Bull. I'm the President and CEO of Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. I'm a proud member of Nipissing First Nation. I'm speaking to you today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples, and I'm honored to be living and residing and working in Toronto today. Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business is about 40 years old. We're a non-partisan membership-based association, and our mandate has always been to grow the Indigenous economy through bringing together Indigenous and non-Indigenous businesses and communities. Chimiigwech.
Okay, so I say that the conversation that we're going to engage in today is very near and dear to my heart in the sense that it's really focused on the idea of social value, and it started off as a conversation about social procurement. The thing which I think is super interesting is that we could have framed this conversation from a variety of different perspectives. Perhaps we'll start with the idea of social procurement because that's the idea that brought us together. And we might find that it expands in the definition of what that means in terms of how companies and engage with procurement from a social perspective and in cross government. Claire, you're known as, if not the chief architect of the Social Value Act in the UK. Can you just give us an overview of what that means from the perspective of, the term, yes, Social Value Act, but what it means as people might think of what social procurement refers to.
Well, firstly, I'm flattered, but there was many of us that worked on the Social Value Act, and one of my roles at the time, besides running Blackburn House, I was the chair of Social Enterprise UK, which is the voice of social enterprises across the UK, and we had the opportunity to work with an MP on a private member's bill, and we knew that if we could get social and environmental value onto statute books and into central government, although the social enterprise sector was very familiar with producing social and environmental value in their organizations, it was the bigger, it was the wider government and the country that we wanted to look at. So we were able to put it through, it got through the government. We were absolutely astonished that it went that far. However, the problem was, as it went through the different stages in government in order to get onto the statute books, it lost its teeth and it lost its power in a sense. And when it came out, is that you could, what it meant is that you could acknowledge it, but you didn't have to do anything about it. But we then, my role then was able to change that. And when I went in as Crown Rep, after a major disaster in the private sector, I was able to appraise government ministers at the time, is that if we put social and environmental value into procurement, that we would get so much more out of it. And one of the key things was doing that economic argument of what social value can really do. And it changed from merely acknowledging to reporting on social value. And that started that whole chain of events within the UK. And it's transformed how we procure in government. And now I'll talk more about that, Stephanie, but this is how it came into being. It was something that we wanted. It was 2012. That we actually got the act onto the statute books. And then we spent a lot of time then campaigning and trying to get organizations to be aware of it. The bigger price for us is also that all the local authorities, combined authorities and councils in the UK also now, and all of the public sector now have to absorb the framework that we put in place. And so social value is there and it's not going away, and all our businesses that conduct work or gain contracts from government have to adhere to the social and environmental policy.
So Tabatha, the CCAB has been involved in procurement conversations as an active source of change, or the need for change in terms of how Indigenous businesses are able to access government procurement opportunities. Can you give us a sense of where you feel that progress is now, and what you think you might like to see as Canada thinks about procurement differently?
Yeah, thank you. So our work at CCAB started really focusing on corporate procurement from Indigenous businesses with the launch of a campaign that we called Supply Change. And that had a number of different pillars, but one of that is an Aboriginal procurement marketplace that is actually built similarly on Supply Nation, which is a marketplace in Australia for purchasing from Indigenous businesses in Australia. And we've seen some real progress in corporate Canada. From a Government of Canada side, they have a program called PSAB, Procurement Supply from Aboriginal Businesses. That's been around for some time, but until quite recently, they had never spent over 1% of their spend from Indigenous businesses. So we undertook a research project with the support of the Government of Canada to look specifically at what the potential was. Because I think originally, a few years ago, and this still exists today, there was this thought that there weren't enough Indigenous businesses out there to meet the supply of even 5% of what the government of Canada spends. And we looked specifically at a specific year and where they spent their money, and we proved that Indigenous businesses in Canada, of which there are close to 60,000, could actually supply 24% of the federal government spend each year. So that did result in a mandate letter going to the Ministry of Procurement to move towards a minimum of 5% spend. And we've been working with the government and other national Indigenous organizations on getting there. I think, and this kind of what Claire has said, currently there's no requirement across ministries in government to mandate that they must spend a certain amount or to report against it. And right now there's no real understanding as to exactly how much is being spent across government. So that is one thing that we've definitely been asking for, that every ministry has a mandated amount per year, moving towards 5%, and that's really a minimum. And that there's some performance measures and metrics against that in performance of ministries, and that also that it's reported up through the estimates committee. There's already a structure within Government of Canada to have to report items, and Indigenous procurement is one of those that we definitely think needs to be reported on more often.
Okay, that's really helpful context. Victor, could you speak from your perspective, from looking at the social enterprise community and the opportunity that's been emerging around social enterprise and social procurement? I know that you are very well placed to speak also to the leadership of Bisocial Canada and that whole movement, and of SEDNet. Can you give us a sense of where you feel the progress is around the social procurement movement from your perspective, and where you think it's moving?
So thank you, and thank you, Tabatha and Claire, for your remarks. I believe that we're moving to a place of greater inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. A lot of folks in Canada, especially the broader equity-seeking groups, are recognizing themselves as economic actors. Those are those on the margins and the periphery of the economy. And social procurement provides an opportunity to create that countervailing balance, to ensure that Indigenous, African Canadians, and like I said before, the broader equity-seeking groups have access to resources to not just scale their businesses, but actually contribute value to society. A lot of times, like Tabatha mentioned, the challenge is the reporting mechanisms, and more importantly, how to ensure that mandates that are put in place are actually, there's accountability metrics around it. So I know that there was 10 pilot projects launched by the federal government simultaneously as in the African Canadian community, simultaneously as a 5% model emerged in the Indigenous community. But PSPC has tried their best to be, the word I'm looking for is more equitable, but the fact remains that federal governments, provincial governments, and municipal governments spend a lot of money. And they have not just a fiduciary responsibility to a broad base of taxpayers to equitably disperse those resources, but more importantly, we as ecosystem members and stakeholders have to find ways and means to build the capacity of the average constituents, because the everyday Canadian does not know terms like social procurement and social finance and social economy, or there's businesses that are operating as co-ops and social enterprises that don't even recognize those words exist. So definitely there needs to be ecosystem mobilization initiatives. There needs to be a greater capacity building. And a lot of that work, I believe, is being done by various actors within the ecosystem, but there needs to be a consolidation of that work and greater solidarity to push the dial and move this thing forward. Because at the end of the day, when the federal budget came out on April 19th, definitely there were some line items that were exciting for various communities, but it still showed that there was a great divide even amongst government departments in terms of working together cohesively to find ways and means to move forward the economic opportunities for all Canadians.
Claire, when you hear, Victor and Tabatha describe where their vision sits in terms of the work that they're doing. Do you see parallels in terms of the experience in that you've been involved in England, and how did you move systems given those parallels that you might see?
I mean, first of all, it was interesting to listen to Victor talk about the bisocial, because obviously that was something that we franchised over to Canada that we started when I was chair of SE UK. And bisocial, the other thing that we did at the time is that we set up a corporate challenge. And with some major businesses in the UK, we set a challenge to spend 1 billion with social enterprises over a 5-year period, which they succeeded in doing. But the bigger prize is obviously in government, when we are spending £292 billion on goods and services in the public sector. 49 billion of that is central government. What I've been able to do is I manage, because of some of the work they've done with SMEs, is to do a pledge to work towards spending £1 in £3 with the VCSE, with the voluntary charity and social enterprise sector, that they would do that. Also, the social value framework that we've put in place, and this framework, and if people want to go and look at the framework, if you go on the Government UK website, it's under PPN 06/20, and it gives you the framework that we've put in place. Now, this framework is really simple, because I didn't want the howls and shouts from our commercial directors saying it was another thing that they had to do. And so the framework has been set around the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have a minimum, and I say a minimum of 10% has to be in every government contract on social value. And so it went live on the 1st of January this year. But the wider work we're doing, and we've got a golden thread going through, we, as you know, have just come out of the European community. And so we are now setting up how we procure post-Europe. And we've also taken the social value piece right across all of that legislation. And we're doing what we call transformation to make it easier for organizations to come into the chain. So why is it important that we try and get more social enterprises into the chain? It is about our communities, and it is about the work that we need to do, because we know that there are many that have fallen behind, who are not represented. I have a number of task forces in government working with me. I have a BAME-led, Black, Asian, minority ethnic, women-led and disability-led organizations, and an overall advisory group. They are my pressure groups to keep the pressure on government. But can I say, the transformation that has taken place in procurement because of social value, and from the Prime Minister's office and him, right through, have embraced this. Because the simple thing that I've said is about the impact on the economy. If we don't do social value, and if we leave communities behind, then we'll have to pay for it anyway. If we use social value as a tool of equality and leveling up, then we can embrace that within what we're doing now. And so that has been the key thing, is to talk about this in language that the business sector understands and that government understands. And it's not something woolly and nice to do. It's an imperative, because in these days after a pandemic, we have to make, in making awarding contracts, we have to make good investments, really good investments. And the framework that we put in place is, if you look at the first page, it is around the Sustainable Development Goals. And what the number one in that is about COVID recovery and building our communities again, and building businesses, including social businesses, into our procurement chain. And in order to do this, we've trained 4,000 of our procurement staff across government, so they fully know what's going, and we are monitoring and we will be reporting on this. So it's been a major change, but it is really starting to bear results for us.
When, how did you move beyond how did you find the measurement metrics, or how did you start looking at the elements of the policy, Claire? Like, did you use your advisory groups, for example, to help inform what those government objectives that would be in alignment with the procurement process? How did you interact and gather information?
We worked with the sector. We worked with the CBI, which is they are the the largest group looking after businesses, corporate businesses across the UK. We worked with the small businesses advice. We worked with everybody, and we brought them with us on the journey. You cannot go on this alone. You need to bring people in. We went out to consultation, and we did listen to what people had to say. How we arrived at 10%, we thought that would be palatable, but it is minimum. And so at the moment, I'm working with colleagues over in the Ministry of Justice, and they have just had to pull in. They've just had to pull in contracts on rehabilitation because they haven't worked. And so what I've said to them is that you can go for a higher spec. And so it gives departments the opportunity to go up. They can't go down below 10%, but they can go up. So we're looking at putting those contracts out again at 20%. But this will be a cost saving because they've just lost a shed load of money on these contracts, and not only putting social value into the contracts, but also including and co-creating some of these contracts with the social enterprise sector. They stand a better chance of success in them operating. And so that's why departments are excited about this, because they see this as an opportunity to run things in a very different way.
Do you mind, Stephanie, if I just have
Go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
So what happens if departments don't meet the 10%? Like, where's the push?
They don't have a choice, Tabatha. You have to have minimum of 10% social value. It's as simple as that. And we have our PPRS. They're a bit like the law enforcement, who will go into departments and check that they are doing this. But as I said, we've trained people. We've also, with all our strategic suppliers, so all your mega companies, PwC, Ernst & Young, all of those, we've worked with them also, so they fully understand what they will expect, and that they will, if they want to get a government contract, they have to have the VCSE sector and social enterprises in the supply chain. They have to demonstrate social value. They also have to do things like on modern slavery, etc. And also, what you may be interested in is that very much I am diversity is going right through this, and I'm also looking at gender pay gap, ethnic pay gap, number of Black people within their organisations, etc. Because what we're saying is that we want our contracts that we put into government, that the people that they use look like the wider community. And one of the goals that you will see if you look at the PPN notice is that our ambitions is that we have a diverse range of suppliers to government contracts. And so that means we want, and I've been working this year on contract readiness for the sector. So working with them so they can go in and get these contracts. Oh, the other thing we've done is that we've ring-fenced some contracts. Now we've come out to Europe, we've ring-fenced some of our contracts just for SMEs and for social enterprises and charities. So we've been able to ring-fence them also.
Is there ever a time, so we've had this situation before, and we hear this from Indigenous businesses as well, where there's a contract, so a set aside contract specifically for Indigenous businesses. And Victor, I think this is kind of similar to the 10 that came out recently for Black owned businesses, where you see a corporation bring on an Indigenous business so that they can meet the target. So in Canada right now, under the definition of Indigenous business, you also have to have 33% of your employees be Indigenous, which is a different hurdle than other underrepresented businesses, but we're working on that. But we have seen times in which corporations have brought or partnered on Indigenous business so that they can meet that threshold of employees, but the Indigenous business actually isn't getting the benefit from the partnership. So at PCAB, we do certification of Indigenous businesses to ensure that they are owned and controlled by Indigenous people, but I just wondered if you had anything to share about that audit type. How do you know that the benefits going where it should be?
Yes, we've all been shafted in the past by these these organizations that will work with you, and then they don't even pay you promptly. That's the other thing we've got in it: prompt payments, 30 days, not to mess around. Cash flow kills organizations, and you can pay even quicker than that. But you're right, and so that's why I have those 3 task forces: one which is Black and Asian minority ethnics, one that is women-led organizations, and one disabled. Because when I first came into government, I had all these organizations that were working on behalf or with, and then when I scratched it, they went. They just put everything in. We work with everyone. We do all of this. Not interested unless I can see. And so that's why I've got task forces there, and we put something in place that actually we ensure that money will go to those organizations. But it's it's a game changer at the moment. A lot of this stuff that we're doing. But it's the support of the sector behind on my shoulder, pushing me and my team in government to make this work.
Absolutely. And thanks, Tabatha, for that. Clara, have you noticed any pipeline issues? And when I say that, I mean legislation is incredible. But sometimes some businesses as social enterprises are starting at third base while some are outside of the stadium. So what I've noticed a lot of times is as legislation is passed and thresholds are met, accountability metrics are put in place, some social enterprises from various communities who have historically been economically excluded for a plethora of reasons aren't able to bid at the same pace. And obviously you mentioned one of the problems, definitely cash flow. Those net 30 models that are killers, sometimes net 60. But has there been a coupling or twinning of the legislation as well as investments in the actual ecosystem of SMEs and social enterprises to ensure?
Yeah. So where you're quite right, Victor. That there is sometimes capacity of organisations to actually get into the ring and bid. First of all, the legislation that's just going through at the moment, and it will become a white paper in September, and this is on transformational and making it easier for organisations to bid for government contracts. So it's the simplification of that is being very important. But so there's a couple of things. First of all, every department now with this new law that's coming in has to publish its pipelines 18 months, at least 18 months in advance. So we're not saying, 1 week, they say, yeah, here's something, and you're supposed to run after and try and get it. And if you've got a big infrastructure, you can play in the playground. But if you haven't, you can't do it. So people will know what is going to be coming up and how they can apply. And as I said, I've been doing a lot of with colleagues right across government who are working with me to support the sector into contracting. The other thing that we've put in place is a consortium model, and we've got government lawyers. I'm just waiting for that to be signed off, because I know that I've gone into a consortia, and the consortia has not been a level playing field. We've been given the crumbs from the cake, while the main person takes the cake, the majority of the cake with them. And so this consortium model is about evening up and leveling up the opportunities. The other thing that I am working on at the moment, and this is with various other groups, and I don't know if you heard of the work that we do on unclaimed assets in the UK, is that dormant assets, when a bank account is, somebody's died and they've left this money and they've got no people, and it usually goes to the government. Well, this money has been used to support organisations. I'm still not happy at how it's being operated, because I just feel that in order to be able to bid for contracts and that, you do need some funding. You do need that seed funding to get you there, because it's a change in what you usually do. So again, it's that seed funding. I mean, there's plenty of organisations that I would say they'll give social enterprises and charities money, but some of the interest rates are a bit eye-watering for me. so they're not good. So working very closely on that, at the moment also. And looking, and the other thing is that we have these, mega organisations which we call our strategic suppliers to government, the multinationals, international businesses coming into government, and we've got it sewn down where they are concerned. However, if we want real diverse range of suppliers, I want a group of social enterprises to use that consortium model to have the balance sheets to be at that level and subcontract to our sector, and also at tier 1 level. So that is also my ambition, in having the consortia, which can work for very small organizations, but it can really help large organizations get the balance sheet to be able to go for those multi-million pound contracts that, we should be getting. Hope that answers your question, Victor.
Absolutely, and it was very helpful. The consortium approach, I think, is practical and prudent. One of the things, and God bless David LePage at BiSocial, Elizabeth Sheik, Stephanie, Ted Wicker, and all the folks that are really pushing, because I love your task force model. But I'll give you an example. In Canada recently, the Fall Economic Statement announced the Social Finance Fund, a $755 million pot of money for actors to engage in social finance. But they developed a separate pot of resources, 50 million for investment readiness, and they call it the Investment Readiness Program. And that model created a dynamic in which, and is currently, where folks can become ready to take on the opportunity of social finance. So the reason why I bring that up is because clearly it seems like, well, not clearly, we knew this already, you guys are a lot further ahead of us in terms of this work. So just trying to see where some of the blind spots are and the landmines for us here in Canada. So this has been very helpful. And yes, you did answer my question. Thank you.
Claire, do you think that you could just explain to us, when you say the 10% or the 20%, like what's actually in that 10% and how do you score it and value it? Would you mind just talking us through some of that?
Well, if you look at the PPN notice, the PIN number that we have on this, and that's when reality hits in, because it then becomes, law. What you will see is on the first page, you will see the number of the framework that we've put in place. And, so there's many, so the key headings to that, the first one, as I said, is about COVID recovery and supporting communities after the impact. The second is about tackling economic inequality. So that's about creating new businesses, including social businesses, jobs, skills, reskilling, fighting climate change is in there also. As we know in the social enterprise, we always talk about trading for people and planet. And then there's the driving equal opportunity, reducing the disability employment gap and workforce inequality. And the last one is improving health and well-being. And I think I said before, these are the Sustainable Development Goals. They're not rocket science, except for the first one, because we didn't have the pandemic. So when you go into it, we have then a whole suite of questions, examples of what departments can ask, but they have to make sure it's proportionate to the contract. So you're not going after a £50, a £50,000 contract. Be able to do jobs. That wouldn't work. That's disproportional to the amount of contract that you've got. So when you look at this, you will see the questions and the support that we give to our departments. Now, some departments are really good, like our departments for the Ministry of Justice have now a social value director, a social value manager. They have a unit in there. The other departments, well, there's three top departments I've got at the moment, and I love to put them all in competition with each other, is Ministry of Justice. I've got the Ministry of Defence, believe it or not, who are really good, and I've got the Houses of Parliament. Three, departments that are really way ahead of the gang. So they're supporting others. And in each department, I have a social value. We have SME and VCSE champions, and they're looking at these contracts also and making sure distribution to our sector. Because as you can imagine, it's so wide. So 10% is a minimum. So you can pick from the questions what you want to put into that contract. But as I said, for MOJ, who failed on some of their rehabilitation, they're going in at 20%, but they will know what they want to see. And what they want ultimately is to stop reoffending, because reoffending is going to cost more money. So it's better that you use this as a mantle to change the structures and the services for people coming out of prison. And that's clearly the result. And we've got Andy Burnham in Manchester. He's the Metro Mayor for Manchester. He's got 20% in for homelessness into his social value portal. So people can drive policy with this and get those results. And that's what is so nuanced about it. And I was just talking to my colleagues this morning on the net zero, which again, we've got another paper coming out on net zero and what we're able to do with that and to push people through. And what we're trying to do is to get those good behaviors into business again. We've seen some really poor practices over many years, and during the pandemic, we've seen some of them. But it is really about how do we get good business? How do we get good contracts that work for the whole of our society and not just for the selective few? And this gives us the mantle to be able to do that. Hope that answered the question, Stephanie.
Oh, it does. Actually, it does. I mean, the thing which I think is so interesting is that when I think about procurement, and I think I catch myself thinking about construction, right? And I catch myself thinking about, sort of very tangible goods and services that we would add into a supply chain. And the thing which I really am fascinated by is that your mandate is really to look at all services. Yes, it's about buying pencils, but it's also about how service providers are being engaged in terms of major aspects of policy: health, justice, education,
house building.
Victor and Tabatha, do you see that we in Canada are thinking about the opportunity for procurement in such broad terms, or do you think that's an opportunity for us to move beyond the supply chain? What do you think? How do you respond to that?
Do you want to go first, Tabatha?
No, go ahead.
I can jump in. Yeah, so definitely, I don't believe that we're that broad yet. I believe that there's some specific organizations that are very influential, that are doing some deep, meaningful work, like Tabatha's in the Indigenous community. The Toronto Community Benefits Network has really pushed CBAs and community benefit agreements, predominantly around the construction space. But once again, that procurement readiness piece, I think, is the challenge. Because when you look at whether it be Crosslinks or Metrolinks or the Woodbine racetracks, there were those 5%, 10%. There was $6 million put aside. And they weren't able to hit those targets, not because they didn't want to, but because there was a pipeline issue. So definitely, I believe that in Canada, there needs to be, if there's going to be legislation around targets, there also needs to be investments in some of those broader equity seeking groups to actually be able to take on those procurement opportunities. In terms of the broad range and scope that Claire spoke of, no, we're nowhere near there, especially when it comes to justice. Recidivism rates in Canada have not gone down in terms of incarceration at the speed and pace that it could have if there was a social procurement lens. Ellis Don built the super jail in Toronto. That was a $30 billion project that happened under Dalton McGuinty in Ontario. So this is 2 premiers ago. And that project, imagine if that project had a social procurement lens behind it. That would have been remarkable, not just for the province of Ontario, but as a test case for Canada. And so definitely we need to be pulling at various levers, whether it be senators, definitely MPs, MPPs. Definitely, it's worked on a municipal level. CBAs and procurement has worked very well on a municipal level, but federally, there's been some champions that have been emerging. But I think that we still have a lot of work to do, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think if we look at corporate Canada, we do see where there's been corporations who have had a commitment to procuring, specifically I can speak from Indigenous business, that has now transferred into equity partnerships with Indigenous companies and Indigenous communities. And those are really leaders who have been in this space for some time. And that's where Indigenous communities are looking to go. It's not about impact benefit agreements anymore that just look at employment for the amount of the project. We want to be owners in the project so that we can create that revenue and continue to put that revenue back into our communities. And we do see some progress there, but from a government perspective, that's something we're also pushing for as well, to say, when you're putting out infrastructure dollars, you need to prioritize those projects to corporations that have a commitment to purchase from underrepresented groups and have a social value commitment within them. But then we also need to be measuring and ensuring that that commitment is met throughout the life of the project. And we're not really seeing that also. So similarly, Claire, I think our ministry is doing some good work. They are also one of the leaders in looking at how they can ensure that they have diversity within their procurement, but where that continued check-in is, I think we're still missing on that. And I think as a whole, government and consumers haven't quite made that connection with the benefit of procuring from underrepresented groups. And if we need to do more of measuring how that is closing the social economic gap, how by supporting Indigenous businesses, you're changing the employment in Indigenous communities and changing the infrastructure in Indigenous communities. And we have some good examples of that, specifically in Fort McMurray area, where we've really seen a difference in the average salary of a family, the average income of a family, and unemployment rates, because those corporations are purchasing from Indigenous business. So Suncor, as an example, last year spent $911 million with Indigenous businesses, about 10% of their spend. But that's been, decades of commitment in order to also build up those businesses, as well as we've all been talking about, so that those businesses are now big enough to be partnering and equity partners with corporations like Suncor and leading that conversation. But I think we still have a long way to go to continue to get that story and the real benefit of that out and into the minds of Canadians.
Claire, we have a few minutes left before our conversation ends. I'm just wondering, do you have sort of recollections or strategies to share in terms of how you approached people who were not necessarily on your page yet, either in government or outside of government? You talk a lot about the economic argument, and that I think we've all totally agree that that's one way and a very important way of positioning this opportunity. Are there other things that you did to bring people that would not necessarily be as committed to this agenda as you to the table?
I think, and I'm sure Tabatha and Victor will agree with me, is my journey as a Black woman has been very difficult, and for me, I've got this, this name Claire Dove, and when people hadn't met me, when I turn up, I'm not the English Rose that they were expecting, and you can imagine, and I ran a women's organization, and one of the things I used to say in that organization, if I'm sitting in the organization, I'm not doing my job, because from the very start in working there, I had to change people's minds. I had to change policies. I had to say that women can do construction, that women can be an analyst or in a senior role. And so, although I marched and during the 70s, Angela Davis marches the 60s, I was there, anti-apartheid. I'll still march, but I know where the big decisions are made, and that's around the board table. And they will throw crumbs out to you to keep you quiet, but unless you're around those policy tables, it will not change. And so I sat around those policy tables, and I articulated the discussions, and that's how the change starts to happen. And then it was about forming with, as a social enterprise when we started in the 80s. It was then about how do we, we were all working disparately and coming together as a social enterprise movement. And, as one of the original members of the a committee that did the first ever social enterprise strategy for the sector, and that was way back in the early 90s, was to be there at that time and convincing people. And I think, I know I've said the economic argument, but also I think people respond to stories. They respond to things that change. And so you can see, I just look at, Marks and Spencer's now, and, all these companies now talking about sustainable fishing and doing all the right things. And it wasn't long ago that they wouldn't even have decided to do that or thought about doing that, because to them it wasn't economically, it wouldn't make the money for the shareholders. So you have to be around those tables. And it was difficult for me to go into government because I was allergic to the civil service. And I still say to my colleagues in government, I'm not a civil servant. But it was being in there. And it's, I can say in 3 years, it has been amazing, the change. But the big step change for me, it was one of the largest companies in the UK going bust. It had an impact on their supply chain, on the SMEs, on apprenticeships. And I was at the right place at the right time when the minister was saying, we've got to change how we outsource. We've got to change all this. And I said, Social Value Act, we just need to change. And that was it. And I can't tell you, it's like evangelism at the moment in the UK, in our departments, because everyone's talking about it, even if they don't really quite understand it. But anyway, they are. And it's great to see that. But, just just thinking about next year, we've got the Commonwealth Games. I remember when we had the Olympic Games here and we had to fight to get some of the contracts, and one of our large social enterprises did. But this time, the Commonwealth Games, they've had it, the social value from the start off in everything they've done. They've listed all the contracts that the social enterprise and charity sectors can go from. So it's that people are switching their thinking more. And I think consumers want it more too. I think consumers are saying, I want something better than this. And the thing that I was speaking to a company yesterday is young people are no longer prepared just to go make a shed load of investors' money at the board table. They want much more, our young people. And so, you know, we are trailblazed with them because they are coming in saying, I want a job that is more than just a 9 to 5, and putting, you know, that I want to join a company that's got ethics and values. And I think that's what's so inspiring to me at the moment, to see our young people coming through.
Well, you know, we're almost out of time. You know, if anyone in our audience actually has any further questions, they'd be welcome to share them. I do just want to say thank you very much to everyone for joining me on this crazy panel. Crazy because I think as a facilitator, I did a terrible job setting it all up, but I knew that with the brains that we had to work with, the conversation wasn't going to be a problem. And so if anyone wanted to know if this was spontaneous, I can guarantee 100% that it was. So thank you all for being so open to this discussion. I really wanted to introduce you and to connect you for so many inspirational reasons, quite frankly. And also too, I mean, the Social Value UK group has had the opportunity to support the Social Value Act's development as a cheerleader, as a skill developer. You know, there is thinking about stakeholders and what they value and how to represent that value, and the value of change is really, you know, our skills that we want to impart across a broader community, across all sectors. And Social Value Canada really, really looks to play a role in that as this agenda develops. So, you know, thank you very much for being a part of this conversation, and we look forward to continuing it and to advancing our social procurement practices in Canada. So, all right. Well, I shall just let everyone know that we do have a 15-minute break for people to network, grab a cup of coffee to stretch, and then we're going to talk about disclosing impact in financial statements, which, interestingly enough, is just an extension of this conversation today. You know, if the government can think about value in terms of its decision making and how it decides to contract, corporations can think about impact and value and share that information in equally appropriate ways to their own reporting processes. And so, you know, we're going to close this session with a very sincere thank you to Victor, to Tabatha, and to Claire. Claire, thank you for chatting with us across the Atlantic. And the problem is that we really enjoyed our time with you. So you might hear from us again, but you know, you have offered to share in the past, and I think you just need to be careful what you wish for, because we've got your number.
Definitely, just to say, is this has got to be a global movement. If you really want to create change, we've got to all work together, and we've got to share all this knowledge and these skills so we can make the place, you know, this world better for, you know, everybody. So I'm pleased to do as much as I can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, well, I would, you know, you never know, Tabatha and Claire and Victor might end up in the networking area. They may, I don't know, I can't guarantee that, but we are going to reconvene and talk about disclosing impact in financial statements with Rosie Dunscombe, Rob Zukowski, Leonie Phillips, and Robin Satal in 17 minutes. Everyone's got a 15-minute networking and coffee break. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to chatting again.
Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you.